right, part 2 of chapter 6. So the last thing that Bod said was that he insists that he start going to school with other living humans. And Silas replied, "We will need to find you a school." No one noticed the boy, not at first. No one even noticed that they hadn't noticed him. He sat halfway back in class. He didn't answer much, not unless he was directly asked a question, and even then his answers were short and forgettable, colorless. He faded in mind and in memory. "Do you think they're a religious family?" asked Mr. Kirby in the teacher's staff room. He was marking essays. "Whose family?" asked Mrs. McKinnon. "Owen's in 8B, said Mr. Kirby. "The tall, spotty lad?" "I don't think so. Sort of medium height." Mrs. McKinnon shrugged. "What about him?" "Hand writes everything," said Mr. Kirby. "Lovely handwriting, what they used to call copperplate." "And that makes him religious because he says they don't have a computer. And he doesn't have a phone." "I don't see why that makes him religious," said Mrs. McKinnon, who had taken up crocheting when they had banned smoking in the staff room and was sitting and crocheting a baby blanket for no one in particular. Mr. Kirby shrugged. "He's a smart lad," he says. "There's just stuff he doesn't know. And in history, he'll throw in little made-up details, stuff not in the books." "What kind of stuff?" Mr. Kirby finished marking Bod's essay and put it down on the pile. Without something immediately in front of him, the whole matter seemed vague and unimportant. "Stuff," he said, and forgot about it. Just as he forgot to enter Bod's name on the roll, just as Bod's name was not to be found on the school databases. The boy was a model pupil, forgettable and easily forgotten, and he spent much of his spare time in the back of the English class where there were shelves of old paperbacks, and in the school library, a large room filled with books and old armchairs, where he read stories as enthusiastically as some children ate. Even the other kids forgot about him. Not when he was sitting in front of them. They remembered him then, but that Owens kid was out of sight. But when that Owens kid was out of sight, he was out of mind. They didn't think about him. They didn't need to. If someone asked all the kids in 8B to close their eyes and list the 25 boys and girls in the class, that Owens kid wouldn't have been on the list. His presence was almost ghostly. It was different if he was there, of course. Nick Farthing was 12, but he could pass, and did sometimes, for 16. A large boy with a crooked smile and a little imagination. He was practical, in a basic sort of way, an efficient shoplifter, and occasional thug who did not care about being liked as long as other kids, all smaller, did what he said. Anyway, he had a friend. Her name was Maureen Quilling, but everyone called her Mo, and she was thin and had pale skin and pale yellow hair, watery blue eyes, and a sharp, inquisitive nose. Nick liked to shoplift, but Mo told him what to steal. Nick could hit and hurt and intimidate, but Mo pointed him at the people who needed to be intimidated. They were, as she told him sometimes, a perfect team. They were sitting in the corner of the library, splitting their take of the Year 7's pocket money. They had 8 or 9 of the 11-year-olds trained to hand over their pocket money every week. "That Singh kid hasn't coughed up yet," said Mo. "You'll have to find him." "Yeah," said Nick. "He'll pay." "What was it that he stole? A CD?" Nick nodded. "Just point out the error of his ways," said Mo, who wanted to sound like the hard cases from the television. "Easy," said Nick. "We're a good team." "Like Batman and Robin," said Mo. More like Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde," said somebody who had been reading unnoticed in a window seat, and he got up and walked out of the room. Paul Singh was sitting on a windowsill by the changing room, his hands deep in his pockets, thinking dark thoughts. He took one hand out of his pocket, opened it, looked at the handful of pound coins, shook his head, closed his hand around the coins once more. Is that what Nick and Mo are waiting for? Somebody asked, and Paul jumped, scattering money all over the floor. The other boy helped him pick the coins up, handed them over. He was an older boy, and Paul thought he had seen him around before, but he could not be certain. Paul said, "Are you with them, Nick and Mo?" The other boy shook his head. "Nope, I think that they are fairly repulsive." He hesitated. Then he said, "Actually, I came to give you a bit of advice." "Yeah?" "Don't pay them." "Easy for you to say. Because they aren't blackmailing me?" The boy looked at Paul, and Paul looked away, ashamed. "They hit you, or they threatened you until you shoplifted a CD for them. Then they told you that unless you handed over your pocket money to them, they would tell on you. What did they do, film you doing it?" Paul nodded. "Just say no," said the boy. "Don't do it." "They'll kill me. And they said—" "Tell them that you think the police and school authorities could be a lot more interested in a couple of kids who are getting younger kids to steal for them and then forcing them to hand over their pocket money than they ever would be in one kid forced to steal a CD against his will. That if they touch you again, you'll make the call to the police, and that you've written it all up, and if anything happens to you, anything at all, if you get a black eye or anything, your friends will automatically send it to the school authorities and the police." Paul said, "But I can't." "Then you'll pay them your pocket money for the rest of the time, your time in this school, and you'll stay scared of them." Paul thought, "Why don't I just tell the police anyway?" he asked. "Can, if you like." "I'll try it your way first," Paul said. He smiled. It wasn't a big smile, but it was a smile right enough, his first in 3 weeks. So Paul Singh explained to Nick Farthing just how and why he wouldn't be paying him any longer, and walked away while Nick Farthing just stood and didn't say anything, clenching and unclenching his fists. And the next day another 5 11-year-olds found Nick Farthing in the playground and told him they wanted their money back. All the pocket money they'd handed over in the previous month, or they'd be going to the police, and now Nick Farthing was an extremely unhappy young man. Mo said, "It was him. He started it. If it wasn't for him, they'd never have thought of it on their own. He's the one we have to teach a lesson. Then they'll all behave." "Who?" said Nick. "The one who's always reading. The one from the library. Bob Owens. Him." Nick nodded slowly. Then he said, "Which one is he?" "I'll point him out to you," said Mo. So interesting. We're hearing some other perspectives on what it's like to see or be in the company of Bod, and it sounds like the magic he has from his freedom of the graveyard or whatever it is from fading works when he's out at school. That he can stay almost invisible, and as long as people don't see him or aren't in contact with him directly, it's almost like he doesn't exist. Interesting. Bod was used to being ignored, to existing in the shadows. When glances naturally slip from you, you become very aware of eyes upon you, of glances in your direction, of attention. And if you barely exist in people's minds as another living person, then being pointed to, being followed around, these things draw attention to themselves. They followed him out of the school and up the road, past the corner newsagent and across the railway bridge. He took his time, making certain that the two of them were following him. A burly boy and a fair, sharp-faced girl did not lose him, and he walked into the tiny churchyard at the end of the road, a miniature graveyard behind the local church, and he waited beside the tomb of Roderick Pearson and his wife Amabella, and also his second wife Portunia. They sleep to wake again. "You're that kid," said a girl's voice. "Bob Owens. Well, you're in really big trouble, Bob Owens." "It's Bod, actually," said Bod, and he looked at them. "With a D. And you're Jekyll and Hyde." "It was you," said the girl. "You got to the 7th formers." "So we're going to teach you a lesson," said Nick Farthing, and he smiled without humor. "I quite like lessons," said Bod. If you paid more attention to yours, you wouldn't have to blackmail younger kids for pocket money. Nick's brow crinkled. Then he said, "You're dead, Owens." Bod shook his head, and he gestured around him. "I'm not, actually," he said. "They are." "Who are?" said Mo. "The people in this place," said Bod. "Look, I brought you here to give you a choice." "You didn't bring us here," said Nick. "You're here," said Bod. "I wanted you here. I came here. You followed me. Same thing." Mo looked around nervously. "You've got friends here?" she asked. Bod said, "You're missing the point, I'm afraid. You two need to stop this. Stop behaving like other people don't matter. Stop hurting people." Mo grinned a sharp grin. "For heaven's sake," she said to Nick, "hit him." "I gave you a chance," said Bod. Nick swung a vicious fist at Bod, who was no longer there, and Nick's fist slammed into the side of the gravestone. "Where did he go?" said Mo. Nick was swearing and shaking his hand. She looked around the shadowy cemetery, puzzled. "He was here. You know he was." Nick had little imagination, and he was not about to start thinking now. "Maybe he ran away," he said. "He didn't run," said Mo. "He just wasn't there anymore." Mo had an imagination. The ideas were hers. It was twilight in a spooky churchyard, and the hairs on the back of her neck were prickling. "Something is really, really wrong," said Mo. Then she said in a higher-pitched, panicky voice, "We have to get out of here." "I'm going to find that kid," said Nick Farthing, "and I'm going to beat the stuffing out of him." Mo felt something unsettled in the pit of her stomach. The shadows seemed to move around them. "Nick," said Mo, "I'm scared." Fear is contagious. You can catch it. Sometimes all it takes is for someone to say that they're scared for the fear to become real. Mo was terrified, and now Nick was too. Nick didn't say anything. Excuse me. Nick didn't say anything. He just ran, and Mo ran close on his heels. The streetlights were coming on as they ran back towards the world, turning the twilight into night, making the shadows into dark places in which anything could happen. They ran until they reached Nick's house, and they went inside and turned on all the lights, and Mo called her mother and demanded, half crying, to be picked up and driven the short distance to her own house, because she wasn't walking home that night. Bod had watched them run with satisfaction. "That was good, dear," said someone behind him, a tall woman in white. "A nice fade first, then the fear." "Thank you," said Bod. "I hadn't even tried the fear out on living people. I mean, I knew the theory, but, well..." "It worked a treat," she said cheerfully. "I'm Amabella Pearson." "Bod, nobody Owens." "The live boy? From the big graveyard on the hill? Really?" Bod hadn't realized that anyone knew who he was beyond his own graveyard. Amabella was knocking on the side of the tomb. "Roddy, Portunia, come out and see who's here." There were 3 of them there, then, and Amabella was introducing Bod, and he was shaking hands and saying, charmed, I'm sure, because he could greet people politely over 900 years of changing manners. Master Owens here was frightening some children who doubtless deserved it," Amabella was explaining. "Good show," said Roderick Pearson. "Bounders guilty of reprehensible behavior, eh?" "They were bullies," said Bod, "making kids hand over their pocket money, stuff like that." "A frightening is certainly a good beginning." "A frightening is certainly a good beginning," said Portunia Pearson, who was a stout woman, much older than Amabella. "And what have you planned if it does not work?" "I hadn't really thought," Bod began, but Amabella interrupted. "I should suggest that dream-walking might be the most efficient remedy. You can dream-walk, can you not?" I'm going to stop there because I'm out of time.